This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Monday morning. It's November 20th. The Wolves' 5-game road trip ended in New Orleans on Saturday night, with the Wolves beating the Pelicans by 1. Overall, it was a 4-1 road trip, brings the Wolves to 9-3 on the season, and they are, at least for the moment, in first place in the Western Conference standings. Next up, 3-game homestand over Thanksgiving week. Knicks on Monday, Sixers on Wednesday, Kings on Friday. A reminder, because it's Thanksgiving and because I will be out of town, that we will have no shows on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. Just Britt Robson on Tuesday morning after the Knicks game, and Chris Hine right now. And it's Chris Hine's birthday. Everybody hit up Chris at Christopher Hine on Twitter and wish him a happy, I guess, belated birthday. It was your birthday yesterday. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Dane?
I'm good. It's funny, like over the weekend, or I think when there's a weekend game that I'm not at and it's on the road, I kind of just go through my weekend as is and then kind of pop in to watch the game just on Saturday night. Like that's what I did with the Pelicans. And then other than that, I'm getting ready for the holidays and all this and that. So I feel like I am turning my Wolves brain back on. Yeah, it's been off for like 72 hours. Yeah, so if you can kind of help me through this. I mean, I was there with you in San Francisco and obviously kind of got the vibe of what the team was. You know, we talked last week, kind of started noticing a different frame of behavior or just kind of confidence in Karl. I think right away in Golden State, which I think us noting that was pretty prescient. Karl's played really well from there going forward. I always think on the road, it's sort of telling to be able to be around the team in the locker room. I'm curious, because I wasn't there in Phoenix, were they all as dead and tired as they looked like they were on TV? And then also with the New Orleans game, what was kind of the vibe in the locker room after both of those games?
Wednesday, it was a rough day, I think, for all involved, beat writers included. That happens when you change time zones and all that. You know, first back-to-back of the season, getting used to playing like that. Emotional win on Tuesday. It really had all the makings of this is going to be a schedule loss, and it was. But to your point, I think the one little bright spot that was in that game was Karl continued to play well offensively. Like he still had a really good game on that end of the floor. The defense was lagging. Obviously, Ant struggled as well. It was just kind of like this was on to the next
one.
Going to happen. Yeah. And you saw like Phoenix was doing things that they don't normally do. Josh Okogie was hitting three threes to open the game, things like that. So the vibe, quote unquote, if we're doing a vibes check here, was like, this was kind of to be expected. Let's move on, 2 days before New Orleans and try to bounce back on Saturday. That was very much the tone, I think.
So then I kind of like, I think that's what everyone was kind of expecting, but I then go into Saturday like interested in how much more that fatigue or drag or whatever would carry over into the New Orleans game. And that was kind of like up in the air. And they really, I'm not saying that was a perfect game by any means, but they did look again like professional. We'll talk about it like the fourth quarter, kind of getting through it there. But did that stick out to you on Saturday that they like seemed again like about their business and took care of the Pelicans there? Again, it was the 5th game on a more than week long road trip. What was that like in the locker room after, particularly because of Cat?
I will say before the game there was one player who told me, he's like, my legs are still tired, like from kind of this whole road trip. So when I heard that, it was like, I was like, oh well, maybe the defense won't be 100% back here tonight.
And it wasn't.
Because I think about how hard they have to play defense and kind of the physical effort that requires to play the way that they play, which is kind of aggressive. So I feel like it'll be interesting to kind of track how the defense responds to just the wear and tear of the schedule. This is just me thinking bigger picture.
I hadn't really thought about that.
And so when I heard that player tell me that, I was like, well, I said, that's interesting. I said, even with 2 days off, he's like, yeah, it's just been a long trip, like kind of like that sort of vibe. But after the game, if there was like, I forget what like Jake's Graph's vibe meter was that he would always post, whatever it was, all the way to the good side was what it was after that game on Saturday. Like you couldn't have had I don't think we've had a happier locker room than after that game on Saturday. It was loud. Everybody was talking. Everybody was happy. Rudy was, making fun of Carl. Ant was just kind of holding court over in the corner where he was sitting. Like they really enjoyed that win for sure.
Okay. So, I mean, how much of that was about like enjoying Cat, right? I mean, Cat, that was obviously Cat's best game of the season, kind of capped off what was overall a pretty awesome 5-game road trip. I just pulled those numbers right before this on the 5-game road trip. So San Antonio through New Orleans, 27.4 points per game, 10 boards, 3.6 assists, 2 turnovers, and 2.2 fouls per game. He shot 64% from 2, 43% from 3. I mean, these are the back to Cat just counting stat numbers.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting that he had a team best plus minus by a lot. They actually got outscored they went 4-1 on the road trip, but they got outscored on it. They were overall a -1. They won the 4 games by a combined total of 17, and then they lost to Phoenix by 1. So actually being plus 15 for Carl was pretty big. Like Rudy was -24 on the trip, and it's not like Rudy played like terrible, but to me, right, that illustrates, especially over 5 games, the Wolves were consistently winning the Carl minutes, not just because he was being like a decoy or a good teammate, a good passer. He was kind of doing all the Cat stuff. And obviously 10 of 11 from the field in the Pelicans game, dropped that last play for him. He goes left, scores, kind of stops short, makes sure, like you could see him calculating. I think he talked about afterwards, I'm not getting an offensive foul here. And he didn't. I feel like all of us, watching at home, were like big credit to Cat. So I think it only makes sense that the locker room sort of jumped on that of like, yeah, man, Cat's back.
That was exactly it. And I think the sense, just talking to some of the guys was like, when Cat can play like that, it's going to be really, really hard to beat this team.
Yeah.
When he is in control, when he is in control of his emotions, when he is in control on the floor, when he is in control of his drives, the key word there being in control, it's such a different experience for this team. Like they won because of Carl on this road trip. And we know that there are times where they win in spite of Carl, and even had earlier in the season won in spite of him. But I think whatever they were trying to tell him from the early in the season to now, and I think the big thing was trying to be in control on your drives. Don't commit so many offensive fouls. We saw how difficult that was for him early in the season, especially with the hook move. I think Finch and the coaching staff was trying to tell him, listen, just do the simple things. We don't need you to be all NBA all the time. I guess it was maybe kind of the message, right? It's like if you are just good, like, and you're solid and you're available, that alone can be enough for the roster that's around you. And I think about it in the context of just Carl's even career here, where, for most of his career here, he's had to be the guy. If they were going to have a shot of winning every night, even in Ant's early years here, Carl had to be, playing at an all NBA level every
all the
night.
Time. Yeah.
But if he could just go consistently good, that's what this team would need more than him, reaching all NBA heights every night, or
Sure.
trying to reach all NBA heights every night. And the end result of that being maybe he's trying too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's getting himself into trouble trying to be and do too much.
Absolutely. I think that's great. It's like taking any volatility out, including like upward volatility, maybe in the name of stability, if that
Correct.
makes sense, right?
Yes,
like
yes.
let's as often as
don't try to make every
Mhm.
play. Don't try to make, don't try to bully 3 people down on a drive because you're trying to get to the basket and you commit an offensive foul as a result.
Yeah.
Like, no, if it's not there, give it up. Give it, and 9 assists goes to show you that he was giving it up.
That's what I was going to say is like he's in control of his emotions, in control of his body, but also in control of his passes. Like, and it was one of those like 9 assist games, but it's like, I don't know, could have been like 4 or 5 more if some guys were like hitting shots too. It felt like that just watching it. And that, like, obviously we know Karl's passing, like sometimes because it's not Jokic level passing or something like that, we don't give Karl credit for still being really, really good as a passer for the center, as a center or a big. And because sometimes like the passes get out of control. It's the too many of the overhead slings and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, yeah, to do what he did in that Pelicans game while only taking 11 shots and having that great of an impact to have, how many total points did he have again? Like 30?
29, I think.
29. Yeah. And then to contribute to probably another 20 points just on assists. I mean, that is a rare weapon in the league that a player can touch on and directly impact 50 plus points in a game while really not being like that ball dominant, like that. I just liked like the size of the role, like the size of Cat's role met the need kind of for the whole trip too. Cause even Phoenix, like they did not play well that game. Karl did, in Golden State, emotions were high, not for Karl. Like it's really, I mean, he really hit in all 5 of these games on this road trip. And that brings like a macro stability to the group too, right? Like what if you win the 7-game road trip, but you don't get, or you win the 7 games in a row, but then after that, you don't get like a stable, consistent and productive version of Karl. Like what does this team feel like, right? Maybe you lose another one of those Golden State games. Maybe you lose to the Suns by 35, and it's just this team still clearly watching them. I don't want to say like immature, but they do have volatility to them. They can stall out offensively. They can let the defense go. You need a stabilizing presence, I think, particularly given the fact that your best player is 22 years old. And for Cat to kind of, Finch always talks about the bumpers. Like Cat kind of was the bumpers for the whole road trip. So again, I mean, I don't know what to say other than he was awesome and in exactly sort of the ways they needed.
If you can bottle that road trip and apply it for the rest of the season, you would in a heartbeat. I think it was notable that he navigated foul trouble on Saturday night. I mean, that's an issue for him as we know, and credit to him for not letting the officials take him out of the game, not letting his own frustration take him out of the game. Finch in the third quarter, I think Karl picked up number 4 pretty early. I want to say maybe like a minute into the third quarter, Karl picks up foul number 4. And
Finch left him in, right?
Finch left him in, and I didn't include this in my story. I didn't have room, but after the game, I was kind of talking to him about the foul issues, and he's like, at that moment, he was debating whether or not to pull Karl, and he said on the next offensive possession, Karl hit a 3, and he basically said, "Screw it, I'm gonna let him ride for a little while longer here." And I think he got him out after 3 or 4 more minutes, but he did let Karl go. And
it was that 3. Well, he had his foot on the line.
Or or he had a jumper or something like that. Yeah,
but it was
and
like
he's like, I can't take him out. I just can't. He's playing too well. And I think that speaks to Finch doesn't like to foul out his own guys. That's the term he uses. but with Carl, you always have to kind of monitor that a little differently, I feel like, than other players, because and Jaden's kind of the same way too, where it's like, that these guys don't always have the control to not pick up that other damaging foul.
Mm-hmm.
But in this instance, I do think it was notable that Finch felt confident enough, whether it was because Carl was just playing so well, A, on the offensive end, or B, that he just, whether it was Carl's demeanor that night or the confidence he had in the last couple games, Finch chose to not pull Carl and let him play that extra 4-ish minutes or so, whatever it was. I forget when he came out.
Mm-hmm.
But significant because, Carl's presence on the floor, as you said, was so positive. So the more time they had on the floor with him, the better it was. And maybe they don't win the game without Carl being able to play that little window of time without picking up a fifth foul.
Yeah, it was interesting, like after the game, and I kind of agreed with this because it was both Cat and Ant. There was, some people were like, okay, I know they both have foul trouble, but can you really afford to? It was kind of like late third, early fourth, if I'm remembering correctly, where both of those guys were in foul trouble, and Finch rolled without them, and the offense did stall out because it was losing both of its its top two offensive pieces. But I did note that in my notes as well, where it was like in the first half when Ant was in foul trouble, like had 3 fouls in the second quarter, he left him in for a little bit longer. After like Finch is doing that, and he's done it with McDaniel some too, where guys get to their foul trouble mark like 4 in the third or 3 in the second, whatever, 2 in the first, and Finch leaves them in for a couple more minutes, kind of maybe to not break up their rhythm or whatever it might be. So it wasn't like Finch was strictly abiding by foul trouble stuff, to pull guys out, but then he kind of did in the second half, and
he did explain that after the game.
Okay, perfect.
If I can jump in. So he was kind of looking at it as like, he's like, well, they had 5 at that point, right? Both of them at that. At that point in time. So his thing was, well, he's like, I know if we're gonna take a hit offensively, but he's like, but I can come back with both of them at the start of the fourth quarter.
Okay.
And so that was kind of his thinking, was like, okay, I'll pull them now, but then they're both coming back in to start the fourth, which doesn't really, like, I don't know. I remind me in the rotations, because are they both on the floor typically to start the fourth quarter of games, or?
Well, typically no, right? Because Ant normally plays like the entirety of the first and the entirety of the third, right? So he's normally out for, but it had all gotten kind of mixed up because
so that was in Finch's head, was like, I'm going to come back with them both to start the fourth, and we'll go from there.
And it's like the classic situation where like it worked. So like they came back and they won. So but if it doesn't, if they end up losing that game by 1, we do the kind of reactive thing. We're like, why didn't he have these guys in here at that time? Like, it's, it's hard to do. And I think it's tricky for Finch to navigate, particularly with Cat foul trouble versus Ant foul trouble versus Jaden foul trouble are all kind of different things, right? Like Ant isn't, he's got up there, right? The Boston game too. He was in foul trouble, but he's not like a night to night foul trouble risk. So he feels like someone you can kind of let go a little bit more. It feels like, whereas because Jaden and Kat are pretty consistently in foul trouble, he seems to protect them a little bit more. And that makes, that makes sense to me. Overall, it's like, I don't know. Maybe just foul less. Like, that's just it's just too much fouling from Jaden and from Kat, and then if Ant is going to also be there too, it just very much kind of discombobulates the rotations.
It's just the frustration of the way that Carl and Jaden each play, and frustration can be a big part of each of their games. And when he gets frustrated, quote unquote, and this is kind of relating to something he told me after the game related to his foul trouble. When Ant gets frustrated by foul trouble, he checks out mentally sometimes, and he admitted as much.
Yeah,
So
didn't love that.
It's a different thing for him, right? Like, yeah. So if let me pull up the quote from my story from today's paper here.
He's
like, so yeah, I asked him about navigating the foul trouble, and he says, quote, "It was hard. I don't even know how to deal with that," Edwards said. I'm happy for myself for coming out in the fourth and finding an impact in the game. I'm actually proud of myself because usually when I get in foul trouble, I check out of the game. So very, very blunt, honest assessment from Ant about foul trouble. And it was also ringing in my ears kind of what he said after the Boston game. Remember when he was talking about how, like, I was going to let the refs foul me out?
Yeah.
Well, the refs fouled him out.
Yeah. And he was like, what the heck?
Yeah, right. Yeah. He was stunned. They called that foul with 10 seconds left.
And it was just like, I don't remember who it was he was on, but it was kind of just like the Tatum play. Yeah, right. It was on Ingram.
Yeah.
And he's just like getting into the ball and trying to like turn him in the high quad there. And you know, and the Tatum one could have gone the other way too.
Tatum could have gone the other way too, right? And with Tatum, he even like reached over his back and like got the jump ball.
A little shove,
he could have been called for a foul like on that play. But yeah, he seemed incredulous when the whistle was blown on Saturday. And but you know, I kind of made this point too in my gamer. It was like Ant fouling out kind of clarified things for the last shot. You know, and because Karl was playing so well, it was like, okay, yeah, well, now there's no question Karl's getting the ball. Like, if Ant was still in the game for that last shot, is Ant the one that's taking it? And does it end up the same way on Saturday night? I don't know that it does.
Yeah.
So in some ways, maybe Ant fouling out with 10 seconds left for this particular game in this moment was a blessing in disguise for this team.
Yeah, that's what I put down just in my notes. Like overall was like foul trouble for Cat and Ant created opportunities for others not normally there. Yeah. And that was that's a good one to add on to it. I didn't really think about it because Cat was in foul trouble too, but Ant being in foul trouble fouling out created an opportunity that is not always consistently there for Cat at the end of games, right? That's kind of Ant's thing, or maybe, you know, they split it or something. But outside of Cat, I thought it was just interesting having your two highest usage players be in foul trouble at the end of a road trip. It was just this glaring situation that somebody had to step up and kind of take it upon themselves to do more because your top two dogs, you know, are down. And I saw Jaden sort of just intuitively kind of pick up a little bit more. He started running a couple, like, or maybe Finch was calling it, like a couple more pick and rolls, like he was initiating the offense. I was like, okay, this is good. This is what this team needs to do is, you know, lean into Jaden McDaniels or Mike Conley when Cat and Ant are off the floor. Mike was not having a good game. So it was kind of Jaden. And then really the player who stepped up was Nikhil, who was aggressive. I mean, there's that sequence that was kind of inspired by defense, which was huge in the end of the third quarter that I think, you know, he gets a steal, goes out for a dunk or kind of like dunk he missed, but it still went in. And then the subsequent possession hit a three. Those are like big plays, but he was really more aggressive all night. Looking for his shot as a creator. I mean, by his standards, a very aggressive game. So I just found that to be, you know, positive that there were players who, when your top dogs were down on the bench in foul trouble, that Jaden and Nikhil, to the degrees that they could, kind of at least recognize the moment, and particularly Nikhil really stepped up in a productive way. What was the word on Nikhil in the locker room afterwards?
Yeah, I was just kind of just asking Finch about him, and it's just kind of what we've come to know about, you know, Nikhil. You know, so far this season, the energy is always going to be there. He's simplified the game for himself on the offensive end of the floor. Finch always likes to say he knows who he is now, because when he worked with them in New Orleans, he was trying to maybe do and be too much. And yeah, you saw it on Saturday. He obviously didn't get off to a great start offensively, but you just kind of figured with his track record that was going to come around eventually. Now his jumper's starting to fall a little bit, hitting threes at a higher clip. And it's been kind of interesting to see just kind of how the backup point guard, like who's actually playing point guard, has worked. Because I feel like it's been more Nikhil than it has been Shake Milton. Just watching it, and it's been interesting to see that like Nikhil is, and Kyle Anderson obviously plays a big role in this, but Nikhil's kind of the backup point guard. And I don't know that we necessarily had that really penciled in early in the season that he was going to be handling so many backup point guard minutes.
The first sub of the first quarter and the third quarter is Nikhil and Naz for Rudy and Conley.
Yeah,
like that's consistently been the pattern, which moves Nikhil into pseudo point guard duties with Ant, because Kyle Anderson is not on the floor yet. Kyle then comes in a couple minutes later and there, so it becomes kind of like a group effort, there. But yeah, Nikhil, because Shake is not producing, and because maybe Shake isn't, just even when he is going to produce, going to be that more pure point guard type of guy, it does fall on Kyle and Nikhil. And Kyle can do it, but there's certain times where, if you're facing a zone, or if you're, you would want Kyle to be more operating within the 3-point arc, you kind of sacrifice something by having him be the point guard.
Yeah.
And they need somebody, whether it's Ant or Nikhil, to kind of be the get you up into your offense type of guy, so you can best use in certain lineup combinations, right? So you can better use Kyle Anderson. So if Nikhil was like incapable of being a backup point guard, that would be a real problem for this team. I don't think it's his like best role. Teams try and pick him up full court, et cetera, et cetera. But he has not been a problem in just the overall bench stuff. There have become some questions and Shake, and it feels like that group needs a little bit more offense, but that's not really Nikhil's thing. His thing is like, be the consistent good defender and then help the offense some situationally. And I think he's doing that, which is to say, I don't think he is part of the more global bench issue. Does it feel like they're starting to recognize that they're a little short on firepower in that second unit? Do you feel like you're getting that vibe? Like, whether it be, scoring punch when Ant's off the floor, or just a lack of 3-point shooting. Like, I think we're starting to feel that second unit really is slowing down offensively.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with Naz's recent kind of downturn in production. I mean, when Naz was scoring the way he was at the early part of the season, this wasn't a problem. So I think this is directly tied to how Naz has been playing. And it was an encouraging sign the other night. He hit his first 2 threes, and Finch was even talking before the game about we need to get Naz going again. And I was like, well, here it is. He hit his first 2 threes. Then I think he missed his next 5 shots or something like that. And so Naz just, the rhythm's a little off, or I don't know. I'm not quite sure what it is. Haven't really spoken to him about it, but
it's a different role, because Cat is playing better and more minutes and all that sort of stuff. Like, there just isn't the extended runs for Nas that they were like seeking out earlier in the season, because they needed that offensive punch. Like, you kind of convince yourself when Carl's playing well that you don't need Nas as much. Like, it's great that Carl's playing well, but I think what we're learning is they do need Nas too. And Finch has talked about it, like getting him back going even when Carl's going well. And I think that might be the answer for getting more juice out of the second unit is 1, playing Nas more, and 2, playing Nas. I wonder if in those really low on scoring lineups, maybe with no Ant and no Cat out there, whenever that happens, maybe run the offense through Nas, more in the way that you do Cat, like at the top of the key. Nas like gets the ball a lot and like isolates some, but it's always, as Finch would say, like in the flow. There's never really like a spread 4 flat. Nas is at the top. Let's try and take somebody off the dribble. A
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
conscientious. And I wonder, given that there just isn't a lot of offensive firepower coming off the bench, if that's maybe an answer to get more juice, is not just to play Nas more, but to play through
Or
him
be
more
him the
there.
focus, or make him
You know
the
what I'm
focus.
saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and maybe that would prove to be too much, because you're asking Nas to kind of play like a star or like a really, really good sixth man. And like, I think we aspire to believe Nas can do that. I don't know if we know that, but I think there's a way to replace some of Shake Milton's minutes and role by playing Nas more. Like, you move Kyle down to the 3 a little bit more, make sure as many of the power forward minutes as possible go to Nas.
Yeah.
Cat's at the 5, Nas is at the 4.
Yeah.
If Rudy's at the 5, most of the time have Nas out there at the 4. We've seen Nas work in both of those iterations. And then the like reaction to that, right, is Kyle slides down to almost all of his minutes at the 3, which starts cutting into Shake. I think that's
Right.
the move. If you're trying to start to not remove Shake Milton from the rotation completely, but maybe if you don't feel like you want to roll with him for 6 minutes in the end of third quarter to early fourth quarter, maybe you don't have to. And maybe you just go back to Nas earlier and push Kyle down to the 3. I think, I don't know. I think that's the best option right now for getting more out of the second unit is Nas.
I'm with you, and I'm wondering too, like, is a little bit about Nas and the struggles right now is a little bit maybe like the shot mix that he's had this year, because his 3-point shooting is up. I'm just looking up the numbers now.
Sure.
His 3-point shooting is up. He's taking over one more 3 a game than he was a season ago, and he's taking one less 2, quote unquote, a game than he was a season ago. So if he's mixing in more 3s, does that tend to just make his production maybe a little more volatile?
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That's the kind of nature of 3-point shooting, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're onto something, and I think that's what I'm suggesting is, can you get more?
Can you get him more going to the basket? Because I think that's what's been missing a little bit from Nas's game recently.
Yes,
is he's been spotting up and shooting, and he's not attacking as much. I love watching Nas attack the basket. It's fun. He's really good at it. And you know, everybody on the team says he's the best at, making teams pay for a mismatch. Try to get more of that going. If I think that's what Finch maybe has in mind, is trying to create these scenarios where Nas has mismatches and can attack them, because that's what he does so well.
Zion obviously didn't play against the Wolves on Saturday, but I was watching some Pelicans games in the week leading up to that. And I want to contextualize this, that I'm not saying that Nas is Zion at all. But do you know what I'm kind of talking about?
First of all, whoever clips your clip that. Nas Reed is Zion Williamson.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Cam, get on that. But there is a poor man Zion similarity to Nas's getting to the basket game. It's if somebody is smaller than him, he can rise up and explode and finish with length at the rim. We've seen, again, we normally see Nas do that in the flow, but you see the difference is you see New Orleans just be all right, spread out Zion attack. You never see that with Nas really, and I wonder, I just think there's some similarities there. Again, a bench version of that, but I think that could be a way to get have we ever seen Nas initiate a pick and roll? Can you run a 4 or 5 pick and roll with Nas? You do that with Cat some. I'm just saying, can you throw in a little bit more of the Cat stuff with Nas? And I think that gets his offense going more. And honestly, it then would take away some of the responsibilities of the other offensive guys or offensive expectation of the Shake Miltons, the Nickeil Alexander Walkers, some of these guys that have a more limited, I think, offensive bandwidth, or just aren't in Shake's case. I think Shake can do this stuff. I think he's just not in the rhythm there and comfortable yet. So in the meantime, yeah. So I've been saying it over and over again, but
Yeah.
I think more Nas and getting more creative with the different ways answers your two problems for you. Get Nas back on track, get more offense out of your second unit. That's what I'm thinking about.
And in that way, if you're able to do that, and I'm just thinking about how that lineup would look if it's like an all like let's say it's an all bench lineup plus Rudy at the 5.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, it allows Ant and Carl to play together more if you're able to do that. I'm just kind of thinking about how
Yeah.
you would go through that in your mind. I mean, I know they like to play Conley and Rudy together as well as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible because of that chemistry.
But is that a have to?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
they're
yeah.
treating it like a have. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Mhm.
But yeah, what about Rudy at the 5, Nas at the 4, Kyle at the 3, uh, Nikhil at the 2, and then
Two
maybe
and
if it is to replace Shake, maybe that is the minutes that Conley's
maybe
in there as
right,
well.
right.
I
That's
don't know.
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think there's ways to get to it. You just need to start. They would need to really be intentional about target. Like it should have this feel that
Mhm.
we start games in halves with Rudy and Cat on the floor, and we
Mhm.
close games in halves with Rudy and Cat on the floor together. All the rest of the time, maybe it's Nas at the 4 as much as you can. Like if we want to say Nas should be playing 24, 25 minutes a
Yeah.
night, he kind of that's the only path really to it, unless you're going to start playing him at small forward, which I'm not going to say that's never going to happen, but Finch scoffs at
Mhm.
and laughs at often. That we even ask about it. I think it's like
Mhm.
intention of Nas at the 4 all the time. All right, Chris, let me grab a quick break right here. Just want to let people know again that have 2 tickets to give away for the Sixers game on Wednesday. Those tickets are courtesy of the Genesis Company. For those of you who are Patreon subscribers, you just let us know that you're available on Wednesday evening, the night before Thanksgiving. We don't want to give tickets to somebody who isn't able to use them. So you just send us a message at patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. That's patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. We're excited about this opportunity to just get more people into the stands. They're great tickets, lower level kind of center court there. So send us a message, patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA for Wolves Sixers on Wednesday. Chris, final thing is just talking about the fourth quarter execution. I think what I tweeted after the game was I'd kind of gone the first 8-10 games of the season thinking the biggest difference from this team this season to last season's team is the defense. And I think actually the biggest difference is the fourth quarter execution. The Wolves were a good defensive team last year. They're 8th in defensive rating. Now they're 1. Like they've been certainly better defensively. But I mean, there was a lot of games last season where it was the fourth quarter and things crumbled, the bottom fell out, whatever. And it has been so the opposite of that from in those situations that when they presented themselves, the Boston win, the second Golden State win after the ejections, and then that Pelicans game, like that was a grown up group that made good decisions in the
Yeah.
fourth quarter. And honestly, they're doing a lot to dispel that question mark of this team of like, what is its maturity level and thus ability to execute in big spots. They've been showing it consistently, and I'll cop to it. That was a reason I had some skepticism, maybe scraped off 2 or 3 wins from their total because I thought they would maybe blow some of that given what they did a season ago. You wrote about it after the game. I mean, this is a thing, right? They've leveled
Sure.
up in terms of their fourth quarter IQ, smarts, execution, and all that, right?
There's a composure about them now and a level-headedness in these moments
Sure.
that was not present a season ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Ant pointed to Mike Conley as the main reason for this. It's just it sounds so simple and easy, right? Like just get to your stuff. Like just
Yeah.
get into something, run a play, run a set, and then get into it. But they seem to have needed Mike to be the guy that just gets everybody organized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And it helps Ant in the sense that Ant's not always having to have the ball in his hands 24 seconds of the shot clock in these in these kind of situations. I'm just flashing back in my head to some of those late game Pelicans possessions. Mike throws it to Carl at the top of the key. Defenses around Carl. I think he passes it off to the right wing to Ant, who has like a wide open three at that point in time. And that was with maybe a minute left or so, or
big hit,
big three at that moment in the game. And then Carl, off of a little action, hits a three that puts them ahead, or something. I think it put them up 2 or something like that.
I think so.
And it was just like simple little things, but they got a little action going. They got a little movement. They got just movement, a little bit of movement, and it created open shots instead of just Ant dribbling out the shot clock and then taking a 20-foot mid-range fadeaway jumper.
Yeah,
which is what it was too many times last year. And listen, that hasn't completely gone away. We still see those possessions.
Well, and it won them a game too. Like sometimes
it won them a game against Boston. Yeah, it did. But overall, they just seem more composed. They don't get rattled. Yeah, road environments. We've seen it now. In Golden State, in New Orleans, on the road. Big plus in the maturity column that this team has answered something that seemed to have bothered them really each of the last 2 seasons.
I want to give Rudy credit in that area. I think like Rudy is like his brain is very much clicking and working in that, sub 5 minute clutch time, whatever, and that it's like he's really thinking clutch time and making smart plays and this and that. I don't think he's been clutch because he's missed a lot of free throws in those times, and he did in that game, but he misses those 2 free throws with whatever, like 30 seconds left in the game. And you're like, ooh, that's probably going to cost the Wolves this game here.
Yeah.
But it was a situation where he got those 2 free throws because the 2 previous shots, he'd crashed the offensive glass and they got called for fouling him while he was going for an offensive rebound. It's like the classic thing where you can like never really get mad at somebody who grabs an offensive rebound and then misses the putback. You're like, well, they were going to get the ball anyways, you did the work. Like, so I don't like, but I wrote that down right away. I was like, man, Rudy crashing the glass, fouled in those 2 situations. Yeah, he didn't make the free throws, but I felt like that really disrupted the Pelicans like rhythm. Like offensively, the Pelicans couldn't really get anything going at the end of the game. I credit some of the defense there too, but just Rudy's been on a team like this before, and Mike's been on a team like this before. Utah, like this Wolves team reminds me a lot of those Jazz teams, and I think they are instilling that sort of professionalism in their approach in the fourth quarter. Mike gets a ton of the credit, and the players do too. I just wonder if it's also one of those little like screen assisty type things of the
well, I mean,
to
your point, like
those,
Rudy does not. The only thing that shows up in the box score is Rudy's 2 missed free throws from that. He did not get credit for,
and he did get an offensive rebound.
That's even though he got them the ball back twice in that scenario. But without him, that possession doesn't elongate,
and then New Orleans is going the other way.
New Orleans is going the other way, maybe in transition. Maybe they're a little quicker. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it gave him, the crowd got juiced up when he missed both free throws. So it's like, the atmosphere kicked up a notch.
But to be clear, bad that he missed the free throws.
Right,
those should have cost him the game, and almost did. But I'm that's why I'm talking more like globally. I've seen enough of these. I mean, it's the block of the showing on the Chris Paul thing and the blocking Sarge in the corner. It's just super
it's making
those
little not little plays, but like those smart, heady kind of basketball plays that, again, don't always show up in the box score, but have a bigger effect at that moment in the game than it does, say with 6 minutes left in the first quarter.
Absolutely.
And it's the consistency with which he does those things.
That's huge.
And he's, and he's one of the people that, speaking back to, Wednesday's game in Phoenix, like I said, there was a sense of, okay, this was kind of going to be that kind of game, but not to Rudy. Rudy's like, listen, if we're going to try to get to where we want to be this season, it's like, he was the one that was saying, we got to come out and play on nights like this. He's like, because in a playoff series, you might be tired in game 6 or game 7, and you got to push through it. He's like, and nights like this are a good test to try and push through it.
Well, I think he understands, like, okay, so like a schedule losses, right, is like if the average game is a 50-50 chance of winning it, it's like certain things are counteracting your 50% chance here, and that 50 becomes a 30 or a 25.
Yeah.
And I think Rudy recognizes, like, hey, yeah, it's not 50-50. Like, we're at a disadvantage here, but we have a 25% chance of winning this game.
Right.
And if we win enough of these, if we win 1 or 2 of these over the course of the year, that could be the difference between the 2 seed and the 5 seed, And that's what I'm saying. It's a Utah thing. Like, I think you kind of need to experience the benefits of that and how that props you up in the standings to really know. Carl and Ant are, I think, still learning that stuff. I think Carl's starting to really intuit it. But it's really important, I think, for Rudy to consistently bring that mindset. And it's something I don't think he did last year when he got a little frustrated. I think it's not just Mike as the old head in the room, the thinker. It's I think, and I mean that in a positive way. I think Rudy belongs in that group too. Yeah. Anything else you want to hit?
Yeah. One thing I want to note about the New Orleans game that I think is also different from a season ago is I think this team has a different internal confidence about itself than it did a season ago. And by that, I mean, you look at kind of the way that game Saturday played out. It was like down double digits. They come back in the third quarter, took a very brief lead, right? New Orleans goes back up double digits again. And I think at the start of the fourth quarter, it was 10. They were down 10. Yeah. And then in the fourth quarter, they were up. New Orleans was up by as much as 14 again. But despite all these kind of multiple times falling down by 14, 15 points in this game, the Wolves, I think, never doubted themselves. They never doubted that they would come back.
Or at least that they could.
Push, that they could, right.
Yeah.
They never really doubted themselves. And I think Rudy kind of said that after the game as well. It's just they have a higher bar of expectation for themselves and a higher confidence that they can go out and in New Orleans on the road, come back and buckle down enough defensively when it really matters to get the stops they need to come back in a game like that, and to have the offensive firepower on the other end to execute when the game gets a little tighter. So I think it's just a different mindset that this group has this year, because I feel like there have been a couple games this year where we've said, and even the players have admitted to themselves that they wouldn't have won that game last year. That they would have just called it a night after, New Orleans makes it 15 again in the fourth quarter or whatever it is, right? Like at that point, they probably pack up their tent and go home. But not this year. This year, they're sticking around the fight a little longer in these kind of games, and it's been paying off for them.
It doesn't guarantee that they will be the number 1 seed or 2 seed in the Western Conference, but whoever the number 1 seed and the number 2 seed is in the Western Conference, they will have that trait. And that the Wolves have that trait, or are showing that they have it, increases the thought in my mind that this can sustain, right? Because this is what great teams do, or good teams do, right? Yep. And they have so many more of those high level team traits this season than they have had before. I mean, pretty much every other year we've been covering this team, they might have had talent supremely over the opponent. But having confidence at times, I think, can even be more powerful than just having a talent advantage. In theory, right?
Yeah.
The one seed has both, right? You have the talent advantage and you have the confidence advantage. And I think that's why, 12 games in the season, the Wolves are the number one seed in the Western Conference, as Finch has been saying over and over again, as we've been kind of lauding this team. He said, but it's about sustaining it. It's about sustaining it.
And he said that the other night too. It's like, it's still early.
It's going to be all year. It's going to be
still early. Yep.
It is still early. All right, Chris, you have the night off, I think, from covering this Wolves Knicks game. It's a whole other war coming up here in the next few days with Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein and Randall and the Knicks. It's going to be physical, obviously, Embiid and the big, strong Sixers squad on Wednesday. The Kings are another good team that presents a challenge in a whole different way. So it's one of these where all we can do is take note of where they are at today. I feel confident that we accurately assess where they are today, and then let's track it over the course of this week. It can go up, it can go down.
Yeah, it's a difficult homestand. It's a tough one, man. It's a tough one.
It is.
But this schedule has not been easy for them to open the season, and they've responded. So
absolutely,
it's going to be another fun week.
It will be. Chris and I will be back next Monday again. Brit Pod on Tuesday, and then I'm taking a few days, the rest of the week off. But Chris and I will do the following Monday after the Grizzlies game. So until then, he's Chris. A very happy birthday to you. Again, give him some love on Twitter at Christopher Hine. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. Until Tuesday after the Knicks game with Brit. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.